Hello and welcome to Wisdom and Productivity, the podcast of Dr. Efraín Martinez. I am a principal in search of wisdom, and I have found productivity to be a great tool for success. Today, I have the great and distinguished honor of having with me Matthew Ebert, who is a human centered leader with 20 plus years of experience in education, primarily focused on school leadership in urban settings. He just presented as a TED speaker on strategies to address the teacher shortage crisis. See the link below. Matthew Ebert, who are you?
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Dr. Martinez. I appreciate it. So I am located in Baltimore, but from New York originally, and spent a lot of my life in Boston, and had the opportunity to work in schools as a teacher, as an academy leader, and as a school principal for the last decade in Baltimore City.
Wow, thank you so much. Tell us how come you became an educator? Where
Sure,
the vocation came from?
sure. I think like a lot of people, I had family who were teachers, and it oftentimes feels like there's something uh, in the blood about it. I say, right, that we often have a mom, dad, aunt, uncle, somebody who took care of us, loved us, and we saw them teach. And so when I was finishing college so many years ago, I was determined to figure out how I was going to make my impact in the world. And for me, that made sense to go into education. Yes, because I liked working with youth, but moreover, because it felt like I was, it was a way of taking care of people, right? It was my responsibility. I was very fortunate growing up, and my responsibility was to make sure other kids and other adults had that access to people who cared about them. And that's why I went into it. And I got my first job, and I'm going to be honest here, y'all. They needed a warm body, and they hired me. I went to a school that I would stay at for 10 years, and I loved it. But when I walked in, whew, they were like, "Oh, you're hired." I was like, "Oh, okay, that's sure." Um, and then I was real bad, y'all. I was real bad my first year. I can't stress that enough. I was not good at my job. Um, but I had some really wonderful folks around me who lifted me up and helped me, taught my class when needed, made sure I watched their classes, and took care of me in a way that ensured I would do the job for a long period of time. And so over a number of years, things got better, and you know, I became more competent and comfortable in my own skin in the classroom, and really found a home there.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing your vulnerability because I seldom don't find people who like me who I say, hey, I sucked my first 3 years as an
Mm-hmm.
educator
Mm-hmm.
terribly, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody is a golden scholar from the get go,
Whew.
and no, the truth is that often uh, it's like it's like jumping into the field,
Mm-hmm.
and you have all this perhaps theoretical knowledge, perhaps your lesson plans are beautifully designed with all the greatest, but you cannot connect with students, or you wonder why a student is not engaging, and you blame them, but you blame everyone except yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that, and I think two things. One, I went to teacher prep programs and this and that, but you know, it doesn't matter until you're there, right? Like it almost all goes out the window. Um, was the Mike? There's a Mike Tyson quote, right? Some version of everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face, right? That's what feel like going to school was, right? Like I've been to school, my mom taught, I've been to grad school. Oh, what is this? Like what's happening? um, yeah. So, but again, right? Like when you're fortunate to have folks who lift you up and say like, yes, you are bad, and we can make you better, that's the best, and that's what changes it, right?
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So I know you have touched on it, but can you walk us through that professional trajectory? You became first a teacher, and
Yeah.
like tell us about that trajectory.
Yeah. So the school I started at in Boston was a larger school that had four small learning communities in it, and I was in one of the communities in the academy for 6 or 7 years, teaching humanities before I went through a principal program that several staff had gone through and folks had recommended that I do. And I wasn't sure about coming out of the classroom, but it was this really great program where you got to be in the classroom half time in your school and then shadow your principal, which I really like. stress with folks, and I know you've been doing the job for a minute. I meet many folks in higher ed, especially, who maybe taught for a year or two, or maybe worked in the field for a year or two, and are educating grad students or undergrad on what it's like. And I'm always just going, listen, I got to see my principal all the time in the first several years, but then I got to follow her around. That was the best that I could do, right? Like, I remember it was really contentious, Doc. She had a bathroom built in her office, and people thought that was the height of luxury. But when you realize it was built there because she couldn't leave her office to use the bathroom without being stopped by everybody, you're like, oh, this is
Mm.
a necessity. Um, so I taught there, did the program, learned a lot. And then I became a job title that I completely made up, which was Director of Data and Academic Innovation. But our school had not necessarily been keeping a watchful eye on the numbers in a way that was usable, right? Like, not necessarily just
Mm.
end of the year scores, just the day-to-day data. We were a newish school, lots of young staff, a lot of great feelings, a lot of enthusiasm, but not necessarily saying, hey, is this moving the needle? Are folks getting what they need? So I did that, and then got to run our school's one-on-one computer program. And then the new principal came in and asked me to take over one of the academies.
Mm.
And so I did. It was a very different place. And I got my first taste of like leadership in that setting, like 27 or 28, which I feel now is way too young. Yeah,
Wow.
it's way too young. I
Mm.
look back at like 41, I'm going, no business, no business. But made some changes right away because things were different, right? And we needed some help, and experienced what even 1 year of strong team can do, right? And so I had come in, and I don't know your experience. I'd love to hear it, because good teaching has almost nothing to do with good leadership, and I know that can be controversial for some folks. It gives me street cred. I know what it's like. It's helpful to me to know what it's like. But going from managing kids to managing adults is a different ball
Mhm.
game.
Mhm.
And it's teaching is great prep for parenting. It is not great prep for leadership. Um, and a good teacher doesn't necessarily mean a good boss, and vice versa, right? So, but I did that for 2 years before my wife and I moved down to Baltimore, Maryland. I got a job as a school principal, and I stayed there for 10 years. And I'll share with you that, I joke with folks that I had 3 principal jobs in this school. One when I got there, which was, okay, this place is not what I was told. This place is very messy and needs some foundational order, right? Like, needs some systems and structures and to write down some things. And then
Mm.
once getting that settled, right, getting into this mode of like, okay, now how do we do the work of great instruction, right? Like, how do we get better at this for everyone else? And then finally, the last several years were like, what can we take away? How free and open can we make this place? How far can we push the boundaries of a public school in terms of what we will do and won't do? How much freedom and autonomy can we give to our kids and adults? And how can we make it a place where everybody can be seen as a human, starting with the adults and the kids? And that's my role. So 20 years in public schools, and this was my first year stepping away.
Matthew, thank you so much for sharing that. And it's so important for school principals and APs and anyone who's becoming an assistant, a principal. It's not about the student. Like, I remember when I started, I had this perception that to be the school principal, I had to be the absolute best teacher.
Mm-hmm.
I have to know more than anyone. I
Mm-hmm.
have to lesson plan and deliver. And the day it got to me, I was writing on the whiteboard doing a professional development presentation I was doing, and I didn't know how to spell something.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden I froze because it's like, everybody's gonna know my English is not perfect. And in that second, I thought, well, maybe if it had one T or two T's, if I write them together, it would look like one or the other. And all of a sudden, I let go and I
Yeah.
turned around and said, "How do you spell this?" And everybody told me, and I started to realize it's not about like, of course, we love the student, but it's not about being the best teacher for students,
Right.
but it's about to be the best support for the adults.
Right.
And it's through loving the adult that you love the student in your school.
I mean, that's beautifully said. And also, did anyone teach you that, right? Or is that something?
Never,
Never, right? I
never,
don't know about your
never.
experience in your programs and even
Same.
in
Hmm.
right, but it's this piece of
Hmm.
we're taught to get compliance, we're taught to get, you know, the special ed paperwork right, so we stay out of trouble, right? Like we're taught mandates, evaluations, and rubrics, and that can get you only so far. But I hear you, and I love that story, right? Like it's when we stop and go, oh, I don't know everything, and let me just tell you all, I don't think I know everything. My job is to make the space for you to thrive, right? And sometimes that
Amen.
means like pushing and challenging, of course, but none of that can come before relationship.
Amen. Thank you so
Mm-hmm.
much, Matthew. So, Matthew, like in Back to the Future, if you could go
Mm-hmm.
back in time to any of the positions you have held in the past, what will the Matthew of today tell the Matthew of back then?
I was I was a great parent before I had children of my own. And I think I would go back to 23, 24, 25-year old Matthew and tell them that there's only so much the adult in that child's life can do, right? And to stop blaming anybody, right? I think I was never angry, but I didn't know anything. And that's the answer. I'm not sure I know anything at 41, but I definitely didn't know anything at 23 and 24. And I think the idea of calling families or telling kids, and this is what was modeled for me. So this is what I did, right? Of like, you got to get your family up here. What I learned at 30, or I learned at 26, 27, 28 was that like, that's somebody's baby. And to always keep that at the forefront, no matter what they're doing, if their action is good, bad, or otherwise, it's somebody's baby. And that's how you have to start the work. I don't know if it would have changed my performance, but it would have changed my interaction, and it would have changed the way I went about addressing things that I felt were out of my control.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Matthew. I appreciate it. Let's talk about what we read. Reading books is a luxury, and in the Wisdom and Productivity show, we always ask if you have to gift two books to a loved one fiction and one nonfiction, which books will those be and why?
Sure. So, love the question. Big reading nerd here, so it's my favorite. Um, I'll always share that I have stayed away from education books my entire life. I read them during grad school, and that was fine. I'm not interested. I like stories, fiction or nonfiction, but I like stories. So, nonfiction, I'm going to try to answer your question well here. The book that I recommend to a lot of nonfiction books that I love, I'm going to go with one that I think hits the mark in a lot of social ways, including schools. The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker is just one. It does away with this idea that you can't judge a book by its cover because the cover is beautiful and the book inside is beautiful. Just about how we gather and gathering intentionally. And I think it speaks to yes, it speaks to meetings and it speaks to school and it speaks to work or hospitals or corporations, but it also just speaks to when you're having people in your life in your house. And I think it's, again, nobody teaches you this stuff. And we just repeat what's modeled for us. And sometimes we realize, oh, I want to do things differently. But it's stories and a playbook. So I can't recommend it strongly enough, The Art of Gathering.
Mm.
Now, again, full disclosure, I don't read a lot of fiction. My wife does. She loves it. There is one series that I read every year, and I'm currently reading it with my 7-year-old, which is Harry Potter.
Ooh, yeah.
Again, I'm going to stay out of whatever the modern fray is about the world, but go with the books themselves. I read Harry Potter as an adult. I didn't read it as a kid. And I read it in like maybe 2 or 3 weeks, the whole thing, because it was just so exciting. So that is a series that I read every year, and a great joy in my life right now is getting to read it for the first time with my daughter.
Wow, thank you so much. There's some people that will say that often the very good fiction books are more real than nonfiction books.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
I've met fair. I've only learned recently that the genre that I really enjoy is called literary fiction, or literary nonfiction. Forgive me, literary nonfiction,
Mhm.
which is it's paced like a fiction text, but it's real world stories. I don't know why it resonates more with me, but that's where I live these days.
I love that. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. I appreciate that. If I ever write a book, it's gonna be a literary nonfiction. I wanna merge those two worlds
Yeah,
because, like I think about Crime and Punishment from Dostoevsky.
sure.
There's not more real fiction book than that one that tells you the anguish
Mm,
of how it feels to know you had done something bad and you had to live with it. Is quite fascinating.
I believe it. I believe it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. So let's talk about being your biggest influences. Tell us about who has inspired you to be the leader you're today.
Well, I think there's a couple different pieces to that. So, you know, my again, I was very fortunate growing up, and my parents were in my life my entire life, and um, I think a lot of how I interact with the world is shaped by my father, um, who was just exceptionally kind at every possible point. Um, Coming from a world where he didn't always have that given to him, um, the way he shaped the world for his family, for his children, was in diametric opposition to how he was raised. And again, never cost anything to be kind to anyone, I think matters a great deal. And that is absolutely from my dad. Professionally, there have been several folks along the way, teachers and school leaders, who have really shaped it for me. In terms of books that I think of or texts that I was maybe forced to read during graduate school, but stuck and resonated with me, is Lisa Delpit. Her work, I think, um, really changed the way that I look to the world, in terms of the classroom and in terms of people. But in terms of teachers, there was a woman named Rebecca and a woman named Debbie, who, when I was terrible those first couple of years, showed me how to be a teacher, across the board. Everything that grad school didn't do, showed me how to do it, and showed me how to take care of each other, as in a very tough morning when I had no lesson plan and came in, because that happens sometimes in life when you're a new teacher and didn't know what you're doing. And Rebecca just came in and took over my class. And that's not a little thing when you're in school. And those kids sat up straighter and looked happier and engaged more than they ever had before. And I went, how? Because that's what a good teacher can do. And then as a school leader, um, there were several principals that I was fortunate enough to be able to pick up the phone and call early on when, and I'm guessing you have this experience in Chicago or wherever city you are, when the district doesn't respond, right? When somebody who's supposed to answer the phone doesn't, or answer an email doesn't, and it's not intentional, but you need help in that moment. And you can build that network of principals for yourself. There were more than just a few here. One who was named Matt, who, when I came down to Baltimore City, met with me and had coffee my first week or two here after I got my job. He didn't know me. He didn't have to do it. He just talked about what his first couple of years were like. And that meant the world. And then just one last one from my time in Boston, there was a woman named Jen White, who was brilliant. And she handled data and coaching and assessment in our school. But she just had these gems of always make time to meet with yourself weekly. This is what one-on-one meetings should look like. This is what the data can tell you, but it can't tell you everything. And she, I think, honestly, more than anyone, shaped the way that I thought about the work moving forwards.
Wow, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Tell me, talking about influences, you have transitioned from being a school principal into being an educational consultant. Can you tell us about that professional transition and also the origin story, right? Like,
Sure.
tell us about that philosophical stand of doing that switch.
Is it okay to start with, I don't know what I'm doing? Can we just do that
Hey,
here? Can we say that honestly, which is what you realize
the
is happening?
wisest people start like that.
Let's go with, like, when you look back, you realize you never knew what you were doing, and then you realize your parents didn't know what they were doing. um, so my transition, my I guess origin story is a fun way to say it. Um, about year 6 or 7 or 8, I started to realize that we had built all the things I knew how to build at my school, and I told my then bosses, I think you need to hire somebody else. I think I'm done. And they said, keep going, like, see what you can do. And I said, like, okay, but I don't know what comes next. We've righted the ship. We're doing solid instruction. People are happy, right? Like, and then we kept pushing, and we in a football phrase, we outkicked our coverage, right? We pushed beyond what I knew how to do. And we really made a space that had its flaws and failures. And I never hide those. Lots of things that we could have done better, of course, myself included. But it was a special place. And I realized in year 9 or so, I was like, I have to go do something else. And I don't know what that is, but I don't want to ever stay past when I should. And so as I felt myself not getting excited, to come to work, to go and move things, and it was more of loving to come with the people and the kids, but it became more of day-to-day management, both I and the school was going to need somebody different. And I don't think you would have known that from my interactions or look, but I knew it. And so I talked to my wife and we had these conversations and decided at year 10, like, this is my last year. And so it's a real luxury, right, to be able to say when you're going to leave and no one pushing you out the door, and not saying, beyond when you're good. So we told my bosses early on so that we could, make sure the hiring process was transparent and clear, and onboard somebody new and they could go through it. And folks could, grieve is too strong a word for personal, but it's a change. And after you've been in a place for a decade, there is grief, right? There's just, oh, what's going to come next and this and that. So announcing in December made it really, if not easy, honest, transparent, and clear for kids and staff and everyone. And then I took some time off, Doc. Didn't work. My wife and kids and I took a big trip out west. And we saw a country that we don't always get to see from our little bubble. And I came back to some of this work called consulting. I didn't know what this was. I had never worked with a consultant. But some folks had been asking me to do some things, and I said, sure. And then what's really coalesced for me was what I wanted to do was bring the things that we did in our little school, and it was little, and it was charter, and, but we could innovate. We could try things because we were good enough that people would leave us be. And I wondered, can we bring some of this work that we do here to other spaces? And that started with working with principals, and coaching is what we call it, but I think that's a little bit askew from what it is, right? Because it's this walking alongside folks. It's not just the, hey, you're doing great, or have you tried this? It's, there's a crisis in your building. I'm going to draft your letter for you, and then you can edit it. So it's one less thing for you to do. Or it's, struggling with this hard conversation with teacher. I've had those. Let's talk through this. Let's role play this, and then let's check in. It's an extension of the work we did at school. So there's that kind of work. There's been writing involved, right? So getting to publish for EdWeek and Edutopia about lessons, right? Just lessons learned, and never thinking we have all the answers or that we're doing it right. And that you'll find most of this work focuses on the adults. And the rest of the consulting has been working with schools on projects of things that we're strong at and that teachers and principals just don't have time to do. That's the honest answer. The first school that brought us in was like, how do we make our schedule like your school's schedule? And I was like, okay, tell us what you want. And then we'll give you 3 options, because principals don't need Amazon. They don't need millions of ideas, and they don't need someone to do everything for them. What they need is interior designers. What they need is someone to say, okay, this is what you want. Here are 3 options. You can now choose. Because I don't know if this is your experience, but a lot of schools, these school leaders, and you're like, okay, now you have to be good at instruction, good at management, good at scheduling, good at the budget. You're like, well, why? Anybody who runs a company has a CEO, CFO, and COO, and they have people. But instead, it's just you and me literally dumping buckets of water out of the building when it floods, because that's leadership. So what we're hoping to do here is to make the job less lonely, to connect folks, and to help them see best practices and a way of doing this sustainably. As somebody who did this for 10 years, I am not the norm, right? And it's not that I'm special, it's that I had a lot of support to make my job less lonely. So that's what we're hoping to do for others. Yeah.
What a great summary. Principals don't need Amazon. They need interior designers. Whoa. Fantastic. With that said, let's take a quick pause and praise the Teach Better community.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. Now let's get back to the episode.
So I'm sure, Matthew, at some point, I know I did, no, I do, you feel like you're not enough. I'm not smart. I don't know. You just said it. I don't know what I'm doing. I just learned yesterday in a conference from a colleague, Angelica Romano, that it's not imposter syndrome, it's imposter phenomenon. How do you deal with that, and what advice do you have?
Really good at the advice part, because I think we're all really good at telling others what we need to hear, even if we can't internalize it ourselves. So I'll be honest, taking over the first place that I did, I struggle with why me. I don't have any experience. Taking over principalship at the school I was at, and most recently, probably doing the TED Talk experience was the largest factor of imposter syndrome I had, because getting accepted to the TED cohort was maybe the worst thing that could have happened, because then I had to do it, and then I had to grapple with the who am I? And even this process of consulting with folks, it's like, what business do I have out here, right? Like our school had all sorts of challenges and problems, and there are people who've done this longer, done it better. There are success stories. And then you look at the internet and everyone's perfect all the time, right? I'm sure you've had that experience where you're looking at somebody's LinkedIn and they ran a school for 3 years and it turned around and it was perfect and the kids could fly and the teacher and my experience was not that. It was messy and it was hard. And I still feel like it. So one, I think whether it's called imposter syndrome or phenomenon, I absolutely grapple with it. And I don't have any advice as to conquering it. I think what I've recently tried to do that I fail at a lot is to go with, I've done all the things I wanted to do, so why wouldn't I be able to do this one? It's just a matter of how much work you're willing to put in or what you're willing to sacrifice for it, right? In whatever realm. And then two, it's and I don't know what age this happens, is that nobody knows what they're doing. Maybe Taylor Swift and Beyonce, they know what they're doing. But I'm not sure outside of those folks anyone really does, right? So I think it's this surrounding yourself with people whose voices can maybe be louder than the voice in your head telling you you're not enough. And then interrupting those thoughts if you can, right? When you have those thoughts and being able to pause and say, what happens if I don't do this? Nothing. But if I wanted enough, everything else I've wanted, I've been able to put in the work and work through it. And then I think the last thing is that the things that don't work out, even if it's not for a reason, when we have the space to look back, we're usually glad they didn't work out. There was usually something that came next that it didn't work out. And whether that was for a greater reason or otherwise, if you can look backwards in enough people's stories, you realize nobody's had a perfect existence. And this is maybe the opportunity to get better or to grow and to change. And so my advice is to keep pushing. And my advice is that nobody knows what they're doing. We're all doing the best we can.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Matthew. As I was listening to your TED Talk, I was thinking yes. Tell us about your TED Talk. What is it about?
Sure. So I was shocked when I got picked because the kernel of the idea was this piece of just schools need to take better care of adults. That was it, right? And really it's organizations. Yes, I talk about schools, but it's organizations. Because you and I know, because we've been on both sides of being the principal, which is, listen, we're going to care for our people. And also if they win the lottery and they disappear the next day, we have to fill their position. That doesn't change, right? Organization, they're not responsible for caring about people, but what we can do in the interaction is we can do a much better job. So the thesis of my idea is to make school better for kids. We must make school more livable and respectful for adults. That's it. And when you talk about imposter syndrome, Doc, right, it's this piece of, I share the stage with some heavy hitters, right? There are some brilliant folks up there giving messages and well-researched ideas. And I was like, oh, goodness, I'm just out here saying we need to be nicer and be kinder and be more human. So my talk emphasizes the points of a culture of care for adults and how to operationalize that, right? So I think it's super easy for folks to say yeah, we need to, take better care of people. But there are ways to do it, to create spaces where it's not just, oh, yeah, well, here's a wellness day. Or, hey, we brought in bagels. It's enough with the carbs already, right? It's got to be this piece of how do you build care into the system? And how do you make sure that what you want adults doing for kids, that you are modeling and doing for the adults? So we talk about how to craft one-on-one meetings with staff that aren't just evaluative rubrics and box checking, spaces to share, right? Where Again, you weren't good your first couple of years. I wasn't good my first couple of years. But where's your space to talk about that? Unless you're lucky enough to have a spouse who can deal with that after hearing about it every day, right? Like, where's your space to openly say, I'm having a hard time? And where your boss can be like, yeah, that's okay. We're going to do this together. And talk about implementing Slack as a way of real-time communication in schools, because I argue that's one of the biggest missing pieces of schools is that, like, listen, we can say we're a team. For those folks who say family, which I disagree with, you can say that. But when you close your door, you are on your own. Unless you ding that PA or unless you hear loud noises next door, you are on your own. And that's hard. And so how we can use that to actually reduce the meetings for people, right? Because so much in education, and this, is that we add to people's plates, but we never take anything away.
Absolutely.
And we wonder why folks are leaving. And then, the last pieces of it really are this thing of, professional development is just broken and bad. Not all the time, not always, but for the most part. And even what we do for wellness, the socializing of happy hours or pizza parties is exclusive and not real. It's performative, right? So it talks about how to actually operationalize the things that we care about to build relationships and help adults evolve professionally and personally, so that you can have the easy conversations and the hard ones, but most certainly so we're taking care of each other.
Amen. Amen. So let's transition to the productivity section, especially in terms of how the heck does one prepare for a TED Talk presentation?
So it's important to be filled with anxiety. It's important to feel like you're not enough.
And that's free. That's free.
Yeah. And then it's important to feel like, oh my goodness, what did I do? And why did they pick me? And this is a terrible idea. I also recommend having a spouse that will listen to you just blather on endlessly. So how does one prepare for a TED Talk? So what I share with everyone, and I think Ted would actually approve of this, is like, they want your ideas, right? Like, it is easier to apply to a TED Talk than it is to get a job, right? There are 8 interview sections for jobs these days. TED is, they make it fairly easy to at least apply, right? It may be rigorous in who they choose, but they want your ideas. And then with TED and TED Ed, right, there's a whole cohort, which you go through with a coach. We had a coach named Bobby, who is just maybe the best person I ever met. Like, you talk about like a coach's coach, right? Like, he had to deal with a cohort of, I don't know, maybe there are 8 or 10 of us, whatever they were, all woefully different. I was absolutely the highest maintenance, which he attested to my wife afterwards. He's like, yeah, he was it. But right, navigating through content and navigating through style and form. So I think the advice or the prep, the imposter syndrome piece is like working hard to get your voice into the TED box is unfair, but TED is a thing, right? It is a thing, but they want your voice. They want your idea, and they want to help you shape it in a way that you haven't done before, because you and I have gotten we can talk in front of people. That's not hard. But doing it in a way that fits the niche of TED, and feels like a living room conversation, and not preachy and not, like a screed or a rant, was a lot of help from Bobby and a lot of help from other folks going through the process. So the process is well supported. And still, when you get on that stage, at least for me, and there's a camera on you, I was terrified. My wife said it the best. She's like, listen, as long as you go out there and don't get attacked by a bear, you're going to be okay. And if you do get attacked by a bear, it's going to make for the greatest TED Talk of all time. So I think, my recommendation is, if you apply for it, great, go through it. And, once you're going through the process, remember, as long as you get through it and there are no bears, you did okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. Is there anything, do you watch like a million TED Talks? Do you read about how to prepare it? Especially, like, do you use any images during the presentation?
Sure.
Like what worked?
So I'm going to go back to giving all praise to Bobby, first of all. And in terms of what worked was listening to other people. I actually never watched a million TED Talks. He showed us a few, but I think it's almost like a plus minus, where like you show you too many and like you try to make yours like other people's, which I definitely felt happen in my like draft 3 and 4. I was like all of a sudden lost my voice and like was more of other people, right? Like, because I was trying to fit it. So I think it's the conversation of, it is the distillation of who you are and the message you want. And that comes through, like, yes, reading, but more of just like good professional development. It's this, right? It's talking to somebody who's done this, who says, we want you and your idea, and we're going to help you shape it. So you keep writing in your voice and let me worry about where to shape it. So I think watching TED Talks are helpful. But I think defining your voice is the most real thing you can do. And what is the thing you care about, right? They said, like, listen, this should be 9 minutes. We have found that 9 minutes are the ones that, you know, hit home the most for folks. It's like, okay, 9 minutes seems like a lifetime, and also not at all when you're like, oh, there were so many more things I could have talked about. But Bobby wanted, like, you have this idea of taking care of adults. I want to know how to do it. Right? And so that's, I think the preparation is being clear on what your idea is. And then what does that look like in practice?
Beautiful. Great advice. Thank you so much, Matthew. I appreciate it. Matthew, I wonder, how do you get organized? Tell us about email calendar and to-do list. What do you do?
So as a principal in the first couple of years, it was to-do list was sure, and it was each day, and I included using the restroom and eating lunch, right? Those things were written multiple times, because if I didn't have it written down, it wasn't going to happen. Literally, my wife had a conversation with my 2 closest colleagues. It's like, you have to make sure he eats, and so I kind of took that moving forward. So yes, I'm a to-do list person, but moreover, my calendar guides me. So somebody who introduced me to Calendly early on, man, that was game changing, because my secretary, even in school, was just like, you can't book meetings for yourself. You're so bad at this. You've overbooked us. So I do a couple things that I did in school that really that woman, Jen White, pressed upon me. I schedule a meeting for myself on Monday of each week. And Friday of each week, there's like kind of like a debrief for myself. And it seems a little bit corny, but it's a time where it's like, nope, this is where we go through, how are we doing? What are we doing? What do we got going on? And then did we take care of the things we need to? And if we didn't, it's okay, right? Like, but we got to pick them up next week, and that's fine. So I kind of live or die by my calendar. And if it's not there, it's not happening. So that's probably my biggest organizational piece. And then, like I said, that to-do list of just like, what are the things we're hitting? And it starts with like number 1 of what is the thing we need to get done today that if we don't get anything else done with, it was still a good day because we got this done. And that's kind of how I move through the world.
The big frog. So
Yeah,
do you what do you use, a manual calendar, a Google calendar? What do you use?
Yeah, so Calendly is attached to several of my Google calendars for different organizations that I'm supporting and my work life. And then I use Slack for myself as well. My team of folks who are helping and supporting, and contractors, right, who help out the team and work with me. We are organized on Slack and in our calendar. And the other organizations that I work with are also similar, right? They might have the Google Calendar and in emails, but I find Slack to just be the simplest, cleanest tool, even for sending reminders for myself, to be honest, right? Like, because it will ping you with that piece. Or, living in different ecosystems, whether it's Apple and Google and this and that, Slack can kind of cut in between all of those. So those are the 2 tools that I don't know. Yeah.
For those that don't know what Slack is, can you tell us?
Sure. So really, the simplest is it's a messaging group messaging app with channels. It's owned by Salesforce, billion-dollar company, used widely in organizations that aren't schools. But it's really a way of communicating with folks and keeping it removes email and keeps the conversation going. At our school, we used it for all sorts of things, and it really changed the game for how we communicated with different channels for different things, whether it was grade levels, whether it was, support with a kid, whether it was the Make It Better channel of like any idea that anybody had, they could share on this channel about our school. So it's a way of communicating. It's a way of talking. And at its heart, it's really just a group messaging app, but it's very well organized. And I find it really helpful just for even my own personal life.
And how do you organize your to-do list?
You mean on
or
Slack?
what do you use? Do you use a pen and paper, an app?
Oh yeah, I'm in a notebook. No, so my to-do list, my notes on conversations, on calls and meetings are all on a notebook. mine currently all have handprints of my children, who that's one of their holiday gifts to me, is to make notebooks, because dad likes notebooks.
I see.
Yeah.
And just this is the productivity part.
Yeah, tell me.
I use a Moleskine
Yeah.
with the dots, because I can also do doodling
Yeah.
when I'm listening to something. It helps me think. Um, what do you use? What kind of notebook do you
So
use?
I would have said like Shinola or Moleskine previously, but the ones that my kids got, I don't know what they are. They're brown with lines, so I don't know. But I find that it almost doesn't matter. Like, the only thing I'll say is I found that I don't like the ones that flip open. That's the only ones where I
Oh
can't get
yeah.
behind, like the detectives on the TV shows. That's the only ones I can't get behind. But aside from that, I love the little graphing ones. Those are fun. The ones with the dots, but really just lines help me as I flip through it. And then I think, right, like when I finish a notebook, I really feel a sense of accomplishment for some odd reason. I know I can't attribute it to anything, but it feels quite an accomplishment to finish a notebook.
For sure.
Yeah.
I was reading the Leonardo da Vinci biography, and it talks a lot about his notes.
Yeah.
And because at that time, paper and ink was so expensive, he would use every single space in the notes, and you had these beautiful designs, and all around his to-do list of things he needed to purchase or buy for a
Mm-hmm.
meal, or things that he needed to do for a painting, is quite fascinating.
Absolutely. I think it speaks to it. Like, we're all so much more than one thing. We don't talk about that enough, and we don't talk about it at work enough. But right, like, listen, everyone's got to buy groceries.
Amen. 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 Thank you so much. So tell us, Matthew, in terms of your health set, do you do any exercise, any nutritional meals, or is that something that is a growth, something you need to improve on?
So I think it's probably something that my wife would say I need to do less of. Uh, Peloton has been a big part of my life. And again, at my best, I'm up early and doing it because, like a reference, I have 2 small kids. So if I don't do it in the morning, I don't have that time to myself, and I'm just a better person if I've done it, if I've knocked the cobwebs out a bit. That for cardio, and then just some general weightlifting. And I am not a specimen of bodybuilding or perfect health in any regard. But again, I think fitness matters, and I think I'm better when I've moved my body early in the day. I'm better in all aspects of my life. In terms of food, nothing special, but we stay away from processed stuff. We stay away from junk stuff. Doesn't mean it's not delicious. You put a bag of Oreos in front of me, I'm gonna eat that whole bag. So we just don't bring it in the house. But yeah, I think I would share that, like, my eating is probably pretty boring. We'd love to dine out, but my indulgences would be desserts. Like, that would be my vice.
Beautiful. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. And I often don't get to talk about this. Tell us about your beard journey. I am new to this
Are you itchy?
environment.
Are you itchy? Like,
No,
yeah.
I have gone through different stages.
Yeah.
You start, and you get all itchy, and then
Yeah.
I think I saw every single video in YouTube, and then you realize, oh, oil, butter, balm, and then it feels great. And I don't know. I don't think I'm going back. What is your journey
I think we should
being
start with
bearded?
this, that your next podcast should be called The Beard Journey, and you should have just people on with great beards, people who have been able to grow a beard, right? Like, and what does beard imposter syndrome look like?
For sure.
My beard journey. Oh goodness, this is maybe the favorite question that anyone's ever asked me in any setting. So, like so many things, it was unintentional, and I stopped shaving at some point. And I remember when I was much younger and I had the beard, and I would do this a lot. And my then girlfriend, now I'd be like, stop touching your face. I was like, it's just weird. Like, I have this. My dad had a mustache my whole life. Never saw him without one. Never ever saw him without. It would have been so surreal. He wouldn't be my dad without a mustache. And at some point, I let the beard grow. I think what it does, right? And I know it's just us two talking, and no one's going to listen to this ever. So it's a safe place. I don't have a great chin. And you know what the beard does? It makes a good
Wah!
chin, right? Like all of a sudden I have, I'm not Tom Brady out here, but I got a chin. And really at some point it aged me up, which was helpful because I am not very tall and generally pretty young looking. And so the beard helped there. I think it just shapes my face. So I'll be honest though, I did all the stuff you did right when I was in my, 30s, 20s, like the bombs, the oils. I ain't nobody got time for that. So this is what I look like, right? Like maybe I put on something. And the other trick that I have, it's not a trick, maybe it's just poor maintenance, is when I go to the barber and get my hair cut, that's when my beard is shaped and shaved. I maybe take care of this because that is my beard journey. Let me tell you, Doc, what drives me nuts about men who have beards is when they do not shave them correctly. And they're shaving them here and they're double chinning themselves and they're not. And man, I don't know. Maybe we could do this together. We could have this, beard journey podcast.
Another consulting business now.
That's it, right? Like talk about not being an expert on something. And now I have two modes. I either have a beard or I don't, but it's not, it just grows and and that's what it is. That is my beard journey. Yeah, that's my beard journey. I was pretty proud though. I was pretty proud when I realized I could do the whole face. I was like, oh, look at that, real person. So
it really is transformational. I appreciate that, man. Thank you.
No worries. Our next conversation, I'd like to hear about yours though.
Oh, for sure. And the final question: when you take off the hat of school leader, consultant, and all this stuff that you do, TED Talk speaker, man, what an honor. What do you do for fun?
Yeah, so my favorite things are drinking coffee, taking walks, and reading. Those are my favorite things, and doing them together with folks or separate, right? Like I'm a very family-oriented person, and that's my greatest joy, right? Like it really doesn't matter what my kids and wife are doing together as long as we're together. And there are some moments that are just completely awful and terrible, and that's just parenting. But they are my joy, right? Like, so that big trip that we took out west that I referenced earlier, 3 weeks going to national parks with the kids and just handing them jelly beans as we walk through the Sequoia National Park. I mean, it just doesn't get much better than that. Taking the walks with my dog. I think time and space to do whatever is nothing is at a premium and something I only gleaned a real appreciation for as I got older and realized that the joy is in the quiet moments.
Amen. Love it. Matthew, it has been a pleasure and luxury having you in the show.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's been fantastic. I look forward to many more conversations around school and beards.
For sure. Thank you so much, man. Enjoy your Sunday.
Thank you. You as well.
Thank you for listening to Wisdom and Productivity, the podcast of Dr. Ebert Martinez.
Chulo.
And I love that production. Chill out.